Well, good morning, everyone. I have just started the webinar. I am recording this, so this will be available later if you'd like to watch it again, just in case I go too quickly or there's something you'd like to see a second time. Hopefully everyone can hear me and hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. Today we are going to talk about debugging your forms, how to figure out what's going wrong. But first, I want to talk about Troubleshooting 101. Um, so my first step usually for trying to solve a problem is making sure I've got the right attitude. I don't know, I know some of you know what my background is. I don't have a background in computer technology or anything like that. My background is in English literature of all things. And so when I first started writing a little code or even working with complex Excel formulas, I had a tendency to get stuck easily, and I would just sort of toss my hands in the air and, oh, this is too hard. I don't understand this. You know, maybe I wouldn't read error messages closely. They actually have information if you look at them closely, because I felt as if I wasn't going to be able to solve the problem before I even really realized what the problem was. So I think the first step in problem solving is to make sure you're approaching it as this exciting opportunity to learn something new, not just as a frustration. And I recognize as well as any of you that especially if you're under a time constraint, that's easier said than done. But the better you can kind of clear out the negativity before you approach it, the better your chances of success. You want to look out for that negative self-talk. So you guys know I'm always a bit of a Pollyanna at these things, but trust me when I say that if I can learn to do these things, anyone can learn to do these things. And starting out with that positive attitude is for the best. And if you start getting a little ground down when you're looking at a difficult bug, sometimes you're going to save more time if you walk away for a few minutes and get outside, come back fresh. So the next thing is you need to make sure your problem's defined. Now, I know all of us have had someone tell us that something doesn't work, you know, and you have to get back to them and say, so what does that mean? You know, did you get an error? Did the web page close unexpectedly? Did you have a toaster fire? You have to make sure you get adequate details to get a frame of reference and get the information that will allow you to know what isn't working. You know, was it specifically this calculation didn't return the correct result? In which case, what would the correct result be? All of these pieces of information are vital in order to be able to define your problem. And there's, you know, step 3, gathering that information. That's what information you need depends on what kind of problem you have. When we're dealing with InfoPath forms, it could be rules, it could be formatting, it could be user permissions, it could be something that shows up in the browser and not in the filler. You know, the surface area for issues there is vast. And so you need to gather as much information as you can to make your job of actually fixing the bug, finding the bug, a little simpler. You need to be methodical when you're walking through things. That was another mistake I made, and it's something that I've seen people make a lot. Especially when I first started using XML and XPath. I didn't have a good understanding of XPath. While I was learning it in my usual kind of hands-on, non-traditional way, initially I wasn't keeping track of the things I'd tried. Nowadays, if I'm working on something complex, I'll just keep a little notepad instance open. You know, oh, I tried this was my result. I tried this was my result. Because you know how it is sometimes. You'll start trying the same thing 2 or 3 times. You don't want to do that. So make sure you're being methodical when you're ruling out your causes. And you might have to go backwards to go forwards. You know, sometimes you're going to have to tear something apart in order to figure out what's broken. But once you find it, you know, you can fix it. And you may have an issue that's got multiple root causes, and you're going to have to kind of address them one at a time. Just keep taking these same steps, or if these steps don't work for you, figure out your own methodology of problem solving and make sure you consistently implement it. So that is my morning pep talk in terms of, you know, how do we fix things. A lot of it really does come down to determining a problem-solving approach that works for you. This is mine. It works well for me. If you don't currently have a problem-solving approach, I would suggest you give this one a try. Okay, moving on into the meat of things. So we're going to take a look at four different topics. I've got a little demo for each one, and I'm going to kind of pop back and forth between slides and demo, which means I'll make my usual mess of starting up PowerPoint and stopping PowerPoint and what have you. We can determine which rules are failing a number of ways. I like using pop-ups. I like using message boxes. I know you're thinking to yourself, well, my forms are browser forms. Yeah, well, you can just change the compatibility for the 5 minutes it takes to add some message boxes so you can use pop-ups in preview. So if you have an issue that will reproduce in filler, right? If it won't, we'll talk about that. But if you have an issue that will reproduce in filler, pop-up dialog boxes are oftentimes a really good way to go. Mind you, they can be annoying, especially if you've got like a looping issue and you have to dismiss, 42 pop-up boxes, but that will just encourage you to find the root cause of the problem and fix it faster. Other options include logging your rule results either to a main data source or a secondary data source. And this final one is just sort of a formatting tip. You can concatenate those logs using a line break, and I included that in one of my samples just because if it's a technique you haven't tried, it's good to know how you can add line breaks to your text fields. Next come good old-fashioned data binding issues. Your rule inspector will show you some of those. The rule inspector, though, she's finicky, right? And I mean, I think a lot of us were affected recently by a Windows update that caused the rule inspector to come back blank. Fortunately, there's a workaround for that. I don't know if there's been a recent Windows update that's fixed the problem, but I know that you can add to your local internet sites. I think it's about internet. Drop me an email if you need information on it. There's a thread on InfoPathDev on it, but I can't remember the details at the second. So the rule inspector, but it can be finicky. Sometimes it has processing errors. And then we're also going to take a quick look at our form files, just so I can kind of show you some of the places I look when I'm trying to track down problems, or when I'm given a new form that somebody else designed that I'm unfamiliar with. A lot of times I just go straight to the form files to kind of figure out what kinds of logic are happening there. Then a good technique to kind of simplify your logic is centralizing your rules. We use a lot of secondary XML data connections for this kind of stuff. For example, if you have 5 submit buttons in your form and they are all doing basically the same thing, it would be better to put that logic on a field someplace and then have each of those buttons trigger that logic on that field. That way, when something's wrong and you need to fix it, you fix it in one place rather than 5. I can't tell you how many times my life has been made better by centralizing logic. And finally, we will look at a qRules option, using your qRules history log to kind of keep track of what's going on. So first, we are going to look at tracking your rule execution. And so the kinds of things you need to think about are, is your form a browser form or a filler form? Does the error occur only in the browser or also in filler? Look, if it occurs also in filler, if you can get this error to reoccur in preview, that's fantastic, and it's going to make your job easier. If it only occurs in the browser, make sure you kind of, when you're giving somebody an estimate for tracking this down, make sure you plan a lot of time for kind of publishing, because, fix, publish, test, fix, publish, test. And if you have a bigger form, sometimes that publish step can take a while, right? Or even worse, like what if it's an admin deploy template and you don't have central admin access, so you've got to schedule your SharePoint admin to upload the template, right? So with a browser form, you may have to kind of build in more time for that. Set up a test site, set up a test library on your site so that you can really get in and tear this form down and republish it without causing disruption to your production library. Don't be shy when you're dealing with browser forms in terms of troubleshooting, like especially if you can't get a form to publish as browser enabled. I mean, I'll I'll start with tearing out entire views on something like that. I just save copies of the form and I'll pull out one view at a time until it publishes, and then I'll go grab my old copy again and tear out only that view and see if it is view specific. You've got to do some of these things to kind of narrow down your problem space and get dramatic about it, as long as it's something where you can keep track of what your next step is as far as what to test. So at any rate, track your rule execution either in a secondary or main data source if this is browser only. The reasons you would sometimes track your rule execution, like do some logging in your main data source, would be if this is not consistently reproducible in the browser. Like if I can open up my browser form and cause this issue to occur by taking these 3 steps every single time, then I'd probably log my error information in a secondary data source, and that way I can just take a look at it, put the field on my form, just take a look at it and see if it gives me an idea of what's going wrong in the browser. But if it is a rule that only occurs sometimes, or an issue that only occurs sometimes, or only occurs with certain users, you want to log it to your main data source so that when Dave from accounting has an issue with the TPS report form, you can go pull down his latest XML from the site and take a look at your error log where you're trying to track what's going wrong inside the XML file that he submitted. Okay, so that's kind of how I start making decisions as to how I want to track down, what my issues are. So I'm going to see if I can find my taskbar here and pop open my demo. Okay, so hopefully that, it looks like that demo's up in your view. I'm so bad at presenting in GoToWebinar that I always try to keep the audience view someplace where I can see it so I don't do something foolish like stop presenting or something like that and you guys end up with a stopped screen. I've been known to do these things. So here is my very fancy demo. Now what I've got here is I've got some rules that are going to cause a looping error. And we'll pretend like I didn't intentionally set up these rules, set field 2 and set field 1 to cause a looping error. Okay, but I know for a fact they're going to. Right now I've got this form set up to do some logging. And what I'm doing is I'm writing to field 3 here, and I'm basically concatenating the current value of field 3, a carriage return character that's XML encoded from an XML file, and then the fact that this was field 1's value, and the date time. So just some basic logging. I've got the same thing happening here in field 2. I'm just doing some logging. Now, to be extremely realistic, obviously if you have a form with a complicated schema, adding some sort of logging to every single field is burdensome. Right, and probably not something you want to do. But I think most of the time when we're dealing with a rule issue, we kind of have an idea of the fields involved. So just log those 6 fields or those 10 fields, until you can start getting things narrowed down. And I did include a link here. This is from a blog from back in 2005 about using these line return characters. It's just an XML encoded carriage return, characters that you can include. And I included a blog post link there in case you did want to see a little more information on that. So let's preview this. Hopefully it previews on this screen. It did. Hooray. Yet another win in my morning. Okay, so I'm going to hit 1 and hit tab. And now we get our some rules were not implied. We show our details, and it's a good old infinite loop error, right? And we have we've all seen this, I hope. I hope I'm not the only one. If I am, you guys, I want somebody to email me and tell me that they have never, ever had this issue, because I want to know. You're my hero. So now you can see we hit our max rule level. What I have is I had field 1 setting field 2 to field 1 plus whatever and so forth. So, it's just a simple math rule. But what I wanted you to see was kind of this logging that sort of lets me know, oh, field 1 had this value, field 2 had this value, field 1 had this value, field 2 had this value. It makes it pretty clear to me when I look at this that field 1 is changing field 2, which is changing field 1, which is changing field 2. right? And that is the sort of information that can be super helpful when you are trying to find one of these errors. Now the next thing I've got is I've also got a message box rule already in place. And if you have a browser form, you can always change your compatibility, right, to filler long enough to add those message box rules, and then you can change it back to browser compatibility. My experience publishing browser forms has been that you can have enabled message box rules and all you will get is a warning, you know, one of those blue eyes in the design checker that says warning, you know, this isn't gonna happen for you in the browser. Same thing as when you use like placeholder text. Your experience may be different. You know, so if you can't publish your form as a browser form with message box rules, you may have to take those out. I hesitate at any point in time to think that my experience with a form and SharePoint is universal, because you know it just seems like there's enough differences, or perhaps Office 365 is going to behave differently. So I don't want to say absolutely you can leave these rules in place and you'll be able to publish your form as a browser form. But you know what? Just, you know, use them to debug and then delete them. Nobody's investing a lot of time creating these message box rules. Again, I'm just showing the field value and the date time. This is going to be super annoying in preview. I'm going to go ahead and preview it, and we can all just feel the pain of this together. And you can see we're going to get 16 pop-ups here as we click through them. We know they stop once we hit 8. Almost there. All right, and now we get our, oh gosh, it must be an infinite loop, panic, panic, message box. And again, pop-ups can be annoying, but they can also help you see which rule's causing the problem, which field's causing the problem. Like if I had a problem stemming from calculations on a specific field, and we're going to pretend that I have, you know, 10 or 15 different rules here, I may pop a message box in between each rule so that I can kind of at least figure out at what point is that some rules are not applied occurring, right? It helps you narrow things down. So that is when and why I would use a pop-up. Okay? Back to the presentation, that's demo 1. I will be including that fine looking form with the webinar package. All of these demos today are like these super simple forms that we're just using for kind of teardowns and to kind of show you some stuff. But in case you were interested about that line break thing, in case you hadn't used it, then you'll have a copy of that. Moving on to our good friend, the Rule Inspector. Some of us were super excited when the Rule Inspector came out, and I still value it. I still use it. It will show you issues in conditions or in the formula if you have a data binding issue, but it won't show you an issue with the target of a rule. The Rule Inspector, and I'll show you that. I've got a little demo for that. It may have a processing error due to more complex formulas. It absolutely hates double eval formulas. And it doesn't help too much with issues from a data source being removed. Like I said, it'll show the issues in conditions or in the formula, but not the target. And it doesn't help you with preview issues that can come around from a data source being removed. So you can also check your form files for additional information. You know, I think we've all probably done the thing where we delete a data source and now all of a sudden our form won't open in design mode, or our form will open in design mode but it won't preview. Sometimes you just have to go check the form files for things, figure out where something was left and where it needs to be addressed. If you ever, my dear webinar attendees, if any of you ever have a form that you just cannot get open in design mode because it's popping up some sort of failure, do not hesitate to send it to me. You guys should have my email address. I'm hillary.stupa@qdabra.com, and I am more than happy to help you with a quickie rescue, because usually it's just a matter of saving the form as form files, tracking down whatever's preventing it from opening in design mode, and I know what it feels like to all of a sudden not be able to open your form and be like, oh no, now what? I've worked on this for 6 hours yesterday and now it won't even open in design mode. So don't hesitate. Hit up the forum, hit me an email. I'm happy to help with those. A lot of times they really only take, you know, 10 minutes to solve the problem, and it can save hours of work. I've had form redos in the past in my history, and now that I know how to fix most of those issues, I'm always happy to help someone else. So to take a look here, I've got another little demo. We're going to take a quick look at Rule Inspector and data binding stuff. I need to figure out which form I have my demo on. I think It's this one. Nope, it's not. Sorry, guys. Let me go back and find the right one. It's this one. I named them all the same thing, which I think is probably super duper helpful. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this, and I've got a rule here with a condition that field 1 is equal to ID. ID is a field in my secondary data source, and you can see this formula resolves just fine. And if we go look at our rule inspector right now, we don't have anything showing up right here in our rule inspector, which is great. And if we go look here, I'm not sure if we get anything in the rule inspector for this conditional formatting. We don't. Okay, so we've just got a little piece of conditional formatting here. The condition doesn't show up in rule inspector. It doesn't show up on either the secondary data source or this one. So rule inspector isn't going to help you with conditional formatting. So if we go and, I'm sorry, I keep like popping back to this slide somehow. You have to pardon me. I'm having kind of a belated Monday. If we go here and we remove this data source, right? If we go manage data connections, remove, and we say okay. And now we try to preview. I believe we get an error, right? And it's because our transform failed because the data object does not exist. Okay, so this is an instance where the rule inspector may not save you, and you might want to look at your form files to track down where is this data object being used. Now you've got a hint right here where you need to look. You need to go look in the view file itself, right? So you would go open up your form files and you would take a look at the XSL for the view, and you would go look for this data object, right? You'd go do a search for nutrition, and that should give you an idea of where the problem is. So if I save this right now, and then we're going to pop over here, and I'm going to, okay, so you guys know there's multiple ways to extract your form files. You probably know at least from design mode, you can go to publish, export source files. That does not help you if your form will not open in design mode. I use 7-zip. It's a free tool. I use it because it's easy. And so I do extract like this. Of course, it's not going to let me because I've got it open in another process, but you know, whatever. We'll close it. Fine. So 7-zip extract. You can also rename your .xsn, just change .xsn to .cab, and then open up that cab file and copy out all the form files. Now obviously that's what, 3 steps or something like that. I mean, because you also have to create a folder for them, and I'm a really lazy person, so 7-zip's free. Right click and extract, and bingo, here I've got my form files. So if I were tracking this down, I would open it up with Notepad. I would do Control F, nutrition, right? There's my view. I went searching for nutrition. Now you guys remember, you guys saw that error, and that error showed get DOM, and then it showed nutrition in quotes. But obviously our view here is encoded, right? So if I had gone searching for quotes, nutrition, quotes, I would not have found it. So that's why I just searched for just the name. Now obviously if your data source name is something kind of basic, like if you'd named it, let's just take a really awful name. If you'd named it test, for example, you may have to pick through a lot of things. Or if you'd named it style, or God forbid class, right? You know, you'd have to pick through a lot of things. But as it stands, it was pretty easy to find. I can see right here in the view where my problem is. You know, I can say, oh, okay, so it's right near where the form says field 1. The rule that has the problem is called rule 1, and it's, you know, it's definitely a formatting field issue. Okay, so that helped me track that down. So if I go back over here and pop this guy open in design mode again, then I would be able to say, oh, there's my rule, right, and remove it. So the next thing I wanted to show you was how double eval can cause the rule inspector to fail. I'm going to add a rule here, and just so we've got a little something in our rule inspector, I'm going to set field 3 to test whatever, and now if I go look at my rule inspector, there we go. Here's my actions over here. You know, field 1 always executes, sets field 3. I'll go ahead and set another thing here. I'm going to set this guy to today. So now we've got a calculated value in here too. We say okay, right? And now we go look at our rule inspector again, and we can see over here in our calculated values, we've got field 4 equals today, and there is also under field 4. So we've got a rule inspector with some stuff in it. So now let's do this. Let's set this guy, and I've got my double eval formula over here in my notes. Okay. Just one second. I'm having trouble. I'm having my usual problems with PowerPoint. And let me show my taskbar again. I was going to copy and paste my double eval formula because of being lazy, but instead we will just type it up like a grown-up. Eval. And what do I want? I want ... comma, concat my field 5 and comma quote. I'm separating this with a pipe. You guys are all familiar with double eval, but you guys probably actually know the syntax and don't have to go crib it from another source. I have to tell you guys, just between us, you, me, and YouTube, I have to actually go look this up every single time I use it. A double eval formula will not stick in my head. I just assume I will have to look it up. So let's cross our fingers here. Oh, look, there's errors. Actual value is parentheses. Oh, too many parentheses. Somebody got carried away somewhere with the parentheses. Okay, one second. So we've got eval. We've got our dot, comma, concat. Sorry guys, my field 5, and then my pipe. I'm waiting for one of you guys to pop up in the questions and tell me what I've got wrong here. And that looks right, yeah? I don't, well, whatever, too many parentheses. At least we've got a double eval in there. Okay, and you guys have just seen my kryptonite, right? I cannot keep those in my head. Okay, and so now when we go to the rule inspector, you can see we've got a processing error, and that processing error is popping up from field 6. And field 6, which has this double eval default, doesn't have anything here in the rule inspector. So that's just something I wanted you to be aware of, is that certain complicated formulas will cause processing errors. We see it too in forms where we use qRules. So it's just, just keep an eye out for that. Now, if I were to, let's see, I've got field 3, field 2, new. I thought I set a rule there, maybe in the wrong one. So we're going to set a field's value. We're going to set field 1. We'll say OK. Great. Now, if I have a rule like this where I'm setting field 1 to text, and then I remove field 1, we're just going to delete you there, say OK, and now I go look at the rule inspector. You can see this doesn't let me know that there's an error, right? It's still, and if I even click on it, it navigates to it like it's all just fine, right? So the rule inspector isn't showing me that this is broken. I actually have to click on it to see that it's broken. If I do something like this and say set a fields value, and we're just, this form's going to be a mess by the time I'm done with it, right? We're going to set field 4, we're going to set it to the value of field 3, we say OK, OK, and now I delete field 3. Let me pull that guy out of there. And now we go look at the rule inspector again. I'm just trying to give you guys a sense of the limitations. We will see invalid field here. Okay, so it's interesting to me, if in an action rule condition I use a data field that is later removed, then I will see invalid field in the rule inspector. If I use in an action in a formula where I'm setting something's value to this field and I remove it, then I will see it in the rule inspector. But if the target is removed, it doesn't show up in the rule inspector. So that was just kind of this little rule inspector gap that I wanted you to be aware of. I'm going to close this, and I want to take a quick look at the manifest file. I'm going to hit don't save. That is from this form. You guys, I always take so long. I always feel bad. Okay, so I'll speed up. No, I'll talk faster. You guys are like, please do not talk faster, you caffeinated wombat. Okay, so if we take a look here at our manifest, the stuff that's of interest to me, and by the way, you guys all know that I'm a Notepad++ fangirl. This is another free tool that is just awesome help to you if you are working with things that are XML based. It's got great XML plugins. So when I go look at a manifest file, I usually just collapse this files group because I don't really care to look at it. I may end up collapsing the views group because it doesn't have anything there that's interesting to me. I look a lot at the data objects down here. Those are interesting to me. And then I usually look at my rules. Now it looks like I did myself the grave favor of saving this form without any actual rules in it. So I'm going to close this other demo and expand it so we can look at one that does have some rules real quick. 7-zip extract 2. Okay, and so I know I've got some rules in this guy. All right, so I'm going to close up the files because I don't care. I'll probably close up the view. I don't think I care. And now we start looking down here and we can find rule sets. Okay, so when I'm looking at rules in a form, I go look for the rule sets. I look for rule set, and then here we've got rule set 1. No, that's not going to help me, right? Because I don't know what node executed that or anything else. So we look for it, we find it, and it is up here in our view, and it tells us, oh, this is bound to this button. This right here is why we're always like, people, name your buttons. Give your buttons decent names, because now you've got to go find control15_5. You can go look for that in your view files, and most likely we'll find it there. And then that way you can track down which button it is. If the rule was on a field, you would have also seen that here instead, and you would have been able to find the rule there. We're going to go look at, I just want to show you a complicated form real quick. So let me just go show you some rules in a complicated form manifest, just so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about here. And again, the main reason I go looking for things in the form files is when there's a problem that I can't track down, like if there's something keeping the form from opening, or if I'm trying to get a sense of calculations. So these are your default values that are calculated. Okay, so if you go looking for calculations, this gives you your calculated default values. Defaults that are hard-coded live in template.xml. Okay, just to keep in mind. So we can go searching here to look at our calculated stuff. Here we've got our data objects. This shows us, you know, what our data connections look like. List properties, those are our promoted fields. And here we are in our rule sets. And you can see all of these rule sets, like they're auto-numbered. You know, it's rule set 6, rule set 5, and you just have to go find it, right? You just Control F and you find it. Oh, that's nice. And if it's something like that, I'll put a closing quote on it so that I can actually find the rule set, right? And you can see that these are rules on the Qdabra rules finish loading node. So those are just a few places you can go look for things in your manifest file. Should you need to, I will sometimes, if I'm dealing with a brand new form that I'm not familiar with, I'll sometimes take a quick look in here just to get a sense of how many rules are there, how many calculated defaults are there, especially when we're looking at some sort of a calculated logic error, you know, where we're getting something that pops up saying, you know, rules cannot be completed. Okay, that's I've beaten that to death. Let's go look at centralizing our rules real quick. So if you've seen forms from us, you have seen the use of secondary XML files for all kinds of helper fields, and we use them for common rules. We at Qdabra have kind of a standard of how we implement these rules, and I want to show that to you because if you've seen it in some of our forms, you may have thought we were mad. We're not. There's a method behind it, and I just want to kind of cover that real quick. I just kind of add fields as I need them to these form logic files, walk through the data connection repeatedly as I'm working on the form. If I think I might need it there, I add it. You know, you can add error handling within there as well as needed. And your form logic, for example, I call it, we usually call them form logic or util or view logic or something like that. The most important thing for you to remember about these XML files is that whatever the default values are in the XML is what they're going to be the next time you open the file. Now I know to you guys this just sounds like old hat, but I don't even want to think about how long it took me to really understand that my secondary data was not going to be updated with whatever I put in my form. It's embarrassing to even think back on that, but it's one of those things that people don't necessarily understand out of the gate, and that is that, you know, if it's a dynamic secondary data source, lives off someplace in SharePoint or SQL or whatever the values are when you open the form, that's what you're going to get. And it's the same thing with these XML files. Whatever the values are when you open the form, that's what you're going to get. They can be super handy for things like defaults. You know, if you always want to be hiding your help section when the form is open, then the show hide field that you use for that should be in your secondary XML, because that way you can ensure it's always blank when the form reopens. And you can also use it, you know, for session level error information, view state information. Let's pretend you've created a tabbed form and you want to always open up on the first tab. You know, you would have, like, in your form logic, you'd have selected tab would be one of the fields, and you would set it to 1. And every time the form opens, it would default to 1, you know, and then the user could use the tab buttons to click between the other tabs. But that way you don't have to do any cleanup. So if you have fields in your form that are doing things like showing or hiding help, or showing, you know, one section or the next in the form, and you're constantly like resetting those on submit or reopen because you want the form in a default state, you should consider using a secondary XML for that, using a form logic XML for that. So here we go. Let's take a look at one more demo. And let me get back to the right folder. This guy is, I think it's demo 3, because I didn't number these in any sort of order. I was random as a person could be. Nope, demo 3 is not the one I want. I want demo 2. Great. Okay, so here's demo 2. Now, first off, a lot of times we will see users have multiple email submit data connections, and the reason they do that is because they think they need a different email data connection to cover these different scenarios of 2CC, BCC, and the subject line. Instead, we will use a form logic file for that, where if we insert field or group here, you can see I've got my form logic. I've got this whole email section. Now, as part of my actions when I go to submit the form, I can do things like set to, set CCC, set BCC, set the subject, and then trigger the actual email action. So do something like this so you can only have, so you can get by with just one email data connection in your form. There's, as far as I can see, so far I've never seen a reason for having multiples. I guess there might be some reason. If some cases you're including the form data, in some cases you're not. Maybe that would be the only reason I could see. At any rate, that's what we do with our email data connections, and we use form logic for that. So here under email, you know, I've just got these rules right here, and on send email, for example, if I want to send an email, I can use any button or any field, set send email to 1, and then these rules on send email will run, including setting the email fields like the to and the subject, right? These 2 rules right here, you'll see a lot in any of our centralized form logic from Qdabra. And different people use different stuff. The thing is, we all know rules fire when a field changes, right? So if I'm going to set send email to a value, I want to make sure I'm looking for that value before I fire the rules. But I also want to make sure I reset the field so that it's ready to go a second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth time. If I just set the field to 1 and run through these rules, and then on another button I want to send another email, well, it'll never run if the field doesn't change. So and you'll see some people use like go or set or something like that, and I'm lazy and I don't use text. I just set things to 1 and then set them back to blank. So to fire this rule, we set send email to 1, which means true, which means go to me. The first rule is basically stop. If this isn't equal to 1, stop. Now in InfoPath through 2007, you didn't have to have a rule action. You could just say don't run remaining rules. But with 2010, you actually have to have an action. So you'll see we've got this little stop attribute. It doesn't have any rules on it. We just set it to blank. And all that is so we can create this little placeholder rule that stops running any remaining rules, period. Okay, so if send email is not equal to 1, rules stop. That's great, because right here what I'm doing is I'm setting it back to blank, so it's ready to go for next time. So the last thing we want to be doing is setting this back to blank and then having this rule set fire again, right? That's what the stop rule's for. It's so I can reset it. The reason we generally reset before these other rules fire is so that even if something goes wrong here or here and we get the some rules could not be applied, the field is already reset in case some other piece of form logic wishes to try again. Okay, so if you've seen these, this is why we do stop and reset. We want to stop if it's not the value that we're anticipating that would cause the rules to fire. We want to reset so that the field is ready to go in case we need to fire this rule set again. Okay, and we always start with those two. The most important thing is that checkbox right there to keep you from, don't worry, if you forget it, you'll be like me and you'll get the rule looping error and then you'll put your head in your hands and you'll cry a little bit and then you'll try again. Okay, and so then I go on and I'm setting my email fields so that I can get my form on the way based on some various conditions. Okay, I'm also using this for a help, a show and hide help. I've got here in my view show help, and you can see I've got this little help section here. So if I preview it, it's always going to default to hidden. The user can show it and hide it. And then I've got these little buttons. Do not do this instead. So here we've got on this guy, we're setting a field, setting another field, we're submitting. Setting a field, setting another field, we're submitting. These rules are all the same. This is the same scenario that I just mentioned where somebody will have 4 or 5 different submit buttons. And now, you know, good old David in accounting with his TPS reports, he comes back and he says, you know, we also need to set field 3 to ABC. So now you've got to go 1, 2, 3, 4 different places and change it. You have to hope you found them all. When we do this instead, where on any of these buttons or fields where I want to run the submit action, all I'm doing is setting submit to 1, then the only place I have to make a change is over here in my submit field. Now obviously sometimes you want to do slightly different things on your different buttons, in which case you might want to make these actions more granular. You might have, you know, update status could be an action you would have because you need to go look at several different values in the form and determine the status before you submit. And so part of your submit rule might be set update status to 1 so that the status gets updated and then these other things happen. So a lot depends on what the logic is that you require, but the point is that centralizing rules in this nature means you don't have to hunt and peck when something changes. I've never done this and regretted it. It's always been, oh, thank goodness, I'm glad I only have to change this in one place, or I'm glad I only have to go configure this in one place. So that is centralization of logic. I'm so sorry, guys. I always go over. I wish I could get through these things more quickly. Oh, I just always have so much I want to share with you. So thank you for your patience. We're going to finally look at the qRules history log. This will be brief. You're like, right. So beginning in version 5.2 with qRules, my qRules users, we added this history log. What it tracks is commands, results, and errors. This is for a session. This is a secondary XML, so it's only during the course of time that you have this specific form open. You can put this, I usually put it like in a debug view. We throw a little hidden button down in the corner of the form, so you can pop over to this debug view and look at the commands that have executed. Frankly, I do that with a lot of production browser forms. I've got like some button that's hidden somewhere or is only visible for my user account. It takes me into this debug view that also has the command node in case I need to run certain commands to get information. I mean, if I've got the qRules command node in a debug view, I can get almost any information I need to figure out what's going wrong, right? Because you can use like get XML to get back the current values of fields and so forth. So I recommend that. Especially when you're dealing with production forms and wanting to make sure that you can figure out any errors in production. If you need the data to persist across sessions, you can add a matching table to your main data source and use copy table to append the latest data prior to submit. And that's what my little demo has. Just so you know, this little demo has as the trial version of qRules. Okay, so don't be surprised if it expires on you, but since we're putting it up with the webinar package, it's got the trial. So this is what our qRules execution history looks like, and I just want to show you this. Now, generally speaking, like a lot of the stuff where I'm saying, oh, copy this stuff into the main data source, look, I don't mean do it forever. I mean, do it while you have a bug, or if you have like a hyper complicated form. I have one in particular that I know of where we kept this in place where on submit it's copying in the history, just because we need to be able to look back at these things and figure out what has possibly gone wrong with them in case of a bug. So let's just type in something that's not really a command, and we can see we've got an invalid command specified. We'll do generate GUID so that we've got one that succeeds, and you can see it just shows you, you know, your command, your result, and your error. If you wanted to copy it into the main data source, personally, I would do that just seconds before submit, because it's going to copy the whole table if you're copying the table, right? And so you don't want to be you know, you don't want to be copying the table multiple times. Let's just do this guy. Come on, format date in tab. So right now you can see if I copied history frequently throughout my session, I end up with a lot of repetitiveness, which isn't helpful. If you just copy it on submit, the only command you're going to miss is your copy table command. And it just gives you a main data source table that would let you have the information you needed if you needed to go back through, especially like if you think about commands that are being created via concat statements or something like that. It can be super duper helpful to just have that to look back on, or if, you know, back again to the browser forms, if you're looking at these hard to track errors in the browser form. So at any rate, that is it. I am finally done. I hope this has helped you kind of come up with some out-of-the-box ideas to figure out ways to track down bugs in your forms. I think the most important things for me have been really narrowing down, is this something I can reproduce in Filler or browser? And then if it's in the browser, do I need to be logging this somehow to my main data source in order to be able to track down the issue? And sometimes that's the answer. And so, you know, if you have to add stuff temporarily to your form to make sure you can track down issues, go for it. And if you have to save a billion copies of your form and do gradual teardowns to figure out issues, go for it. Just save a copy, publish it to a test library. You know, be fearless. Does anybody have any questions? And you guys know my email address. Again, it's hillary.stupa@qdabra.com. You guys know I'm hanging on the forum all the time. And so do feel free to let me know when you have a question, and we'll have the little usual, I think I've got like 2 whole questions in this survey. I was going to do something funny, and then I thought, you know, every time I try to think I'm funny, I'm not, so I left out my funny question. I was going to ask you guys what kind of chocolate you liked. So at any rate, I sure hope everybody has a great day. I really appreciate you. I'm glad you attended the webinar. Do not be afraid. You can find and solve your problems. Just be curious and just go after these problems as if there's, you know, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Okay? Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.